So if you're at a stage where you are beginning to prototype your design work, meaning that you're taking kind of like these flattened designs and layering on interactivity, there's a couple of expectations I want you to keep in mind as you're going through the prototyping phase of your project. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list. This is not a rubric by which I will evaluate your design, although some portions of these things might end up in an assignment rubric. But these are just some things for you to consider as you're going through your prototyping phase. So some of the expectations that folks have would be that I can understand the concept and what the app is designed to do. Um, so some folks who design like really specialized products forget that not everyone is an expert on day one or minute one when using the product. So there needs to be some level of like expectation setting. So maybe like it doesn't have to live in the app, but maybe when you submit the app for feedback, maybe you provide the project proposal and the problem statement. That will give context. Um, for some folks, like for some apps, the context will come from some sort of like in-app training. So like here's a little tooltip. So like, hey, like this is where you get home. Hey, this is where you send a message. Hey, this is where you find your profile. I'm sure you've seen that in other apps, but that's also another way to include context. You know, when for someone who is looking at your product for the first time. The initial app tour, again, is just an idea. It's not going to be applicable for every single app that you design. So, like, for example, in my sample project, the emergency 911 app, you don't want to interrupt someone with a welcome tour when they're trying to report an emergency. So like that would be a great place for it. But maybe that's part of the original sign up process when they're downloading the app for the first time. Maybe that's in a menu somewhere. If they want to learn about the features of the app, I can put it there. Um, but I may not want to open up the app with that, especially if it's something based around urgency, and immediacy. Another expectation I have for prototypes is that I should be able to reasonably navigate around the app. So there are menus, there are buttons, there are links, there's the ability to go back to the previous screen, and so forth. Um, in some prototypes that I see from new designers, they design in a very linear process, but you'll find in like user testing or just like organically, people rarely use the app the way that you design it. So they will tap if it's on the screen, they'll tap it. If it doesn't work, it's kind of like, it kind of like breaks the illusion that the app's not functional. What we want is the ability for someone to not have to suspend uh, or like reintroduce disbelief while they're trying to use the app, especially at a prototype stage. So just make sure that if you have a menu, it it like links on every page. If you have links, when you tap it, they go somewhere. Same thing with buttons. Um, and never underestimate the desire for someone to go back on the page stack. So like I don't think you can disable that as a function, but on on Android phones, there's typically like a hard button or at least a persistent like OS level soft button that will always have the back button. Whereas in iOS, you may need to design that into the actual screen itself because there's no hard button that takes you back. Although in some cases you can just swipe. But anyways, you can't rely on everybody knowing that interaction. All right, so my next expectation, or the general expectation of users, is that anything on the screen that looks clickable should be clickable, and that the designer has put something on the screen for a reason. So everything is intentional. There's no extraneous elements. There's no lorem ipsum. Again, everything on that screen is intentional. If it's on the screen, they're going to try to tap it. They're going to try to interact with it. So keep that in mind as you're designing your screens, not just for functionality, but for aesthetic purposes as well. Another expectation is that there shouldn't feel like there are dead ends in your product design. So what that means is that when there are some cases where you won't get as far into the design that you want. So sometimes like you'll allude to an app feature being available, but it's just not ready for prime time. So a way around that, so instead of killing it from the design, potentially having to remove it from every screen, is it just to create an alert saying that, hey, this feature is not yet available. Another clever thing you can do for data collection purposes, or like crowdsourcing ideas, is to use that alert to solicit feedback. So you can say something like, "Hey, this feature is not yet available. What did you expect to see here?" And that kind of opens up the conversation with the user to better understand what they expected to see. So like what type of functionality, how is it going to behave, what information did it need, what would be the intended output, etc. Um, if you ever have to debate whether or not to keep something in or remove it, I would say you should remove it. Um, in Unless it's a work in progress. Like if it's a work in progress, it's a little bit more difficult to decouple. However, if you just know you're never going to get to that part of the design, just remove it because it's going to create more question than it will provide clarity. So in that scenario, I would remove. But yeah, so if you have functionality that doesn't exist, address it. Address it somehow. Most clever way is just to use it to solicit feedback on what they expect to see. Okay, so the next expectation for UX prototypes is, especially for high fidelity designs. So what I mean by high fidelity is, you know, the look and feel of the product gives me a signal that this is ready to go into the App Store. It's ready for prime time. People are going to use it like today. So at that level of design, there are no placeholder images or icons. So there shouldn't be like the same stock image over and over and over. Um, for much good reason. I can't think of one right now, anyways. There's definitely no like placeholder or dummy text, so no lorem ipsum content. Not every username should be Jane Doe. Like you should add the variety someone would expect to see in a live product. There's certainly no dead links or buttons, so everything is linked. Everything goes to the right page, and there's an expectation that this design is going to work reasonably well for the device for which it was designed. So again, if it's a mobile app, it should work on most mobile phones. If it's a desktop app, it should work in most browser sizes. So it's important that you kind of zoom in and out, and every once in a while step away from the design part and just look at it from a user perspective on the device it's intended to render on.